originally did this presentation for one of my classes, and I thought it was kind of, I don't know, fun and enjoyable, so I decided to put it on YouTube as well. A paper of mine is called We Are Collaborators in Creation, the Christogenesis of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and Technological Singularity. So this is going to delve more into science fiction than I usually do, but it's also going to include some critical theory, Teilhard's own theology that I've done a video on in the past, and it's also going to take a look at some Francis Fukuyama quotes as well, though nothing having to do with end of history, just in case there's any Fukuyama detractors out there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and share this with you. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a man decades ahead of his time in regard to theology and science. An ordained Jesuit priest, Teilhard was also a philosopher and paleontologist, best known for his blend of evolutionary science and theology. Because of his deeply mystical writing, he was admonished by the Roman Catholic Church and also by his beloved Jesuit order. However, his faith did not waver in these warnings. Teilhard's writing, including The Phenomenon of Man, The Future of Man, and How I Believe, will be discussed in this essay to paint a picture for the reader of his science-informed theology, which reflects a sort of evolution of man in regard to a universal Christ and a cosmic net consciousness. For Teilhard, the omega point, his most well-known thesis, is representative of the final and greatest evolutionary point, where the material and human were finally reunited with the divine. This omega point is for Teilhard the Logos, which draws all things into himself through an upward ascent and consummation, the singularity, when everything that exists, both animate and inanimate, becomes one with divinity. Many proponents of technological singularity and transhumanism appropriate Teilhard's theology on a divine singularity to support the desire to fuse the human and technological into a sort of new creation. So if you're interested in Teilhard's theology, I'm going to get into it a little bit at length in this presentation, but also there's another video that I did recently that talks about more of his life and work as well. So what's this paper about? This essay is going to discuss the life and work of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and his unique Christocentrism and Christogenesis as well, while building upon and extending his omega point forward in time and logic to examine technological singularity and transhumanism and the slippery slope of each, ethically speaking, and implications for society. So a bit about Teilhard. Teilhard de Chardin's life spanned from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century, which was an incredible time that represented both world-shaking loss through 2 world wars, and also incredible gains in science and technology as well. Huge leaps. Teilhard was born in Sarsenat, France in 1881 and was the son of a farmer who also had an interest in science. This interest carried on to his son, Teilhard, and came to inform his faith in his life's work as well. Teilhard attended a Jesuit boarding school and as a child, and went on to become a Jesuit novitiate at 18 and was ordained in 1911. So during World War I, Teilhard chose to serve as a stretcher bearer rather than a front lines chaplain or hospital chaplain, and his bravery during the war effort was awarded national recognition. After the war, he taught at the Catholic Institute of Paris in the fields of paleontology and geology. He went on to take part in many scientific expeditions across the globe and was part of the discovery of the Peking man skull. This discovery was significant, as the Peking man represented a previously unknown step in humanity's common evolutionary journey. His time in China also called him to consider his views of race and of being an outsider himself, both through the discovery of the Peking man and his own ideas on the common man. Overall, he spent roughly 20 years of his life in China working closely with Chinese scientists and intellectuals. During World War II, he spent several years in a sort of diplomatic captivity in Beijing under Japanese occupation. Most of Teilhard's work was scientific in nature, but his attempts to combine theology, philosophy, and evolutionary science are his most well known. He struggled to publish his philosophical works, and actually the publication was forbidden by the Jesuit order during his lifetime. But due to the objections of his work by the church, his theological writings were not published widely until the 1950s and after his death in 1955. His work received sharp criticism and suppression from the Roman Catholic Church, and in 1962, posthumously, the Holy Office issued a warning against viewing his work in an uncritical manner. However, his devotion to Christianity was never in question. Teilhard's life was bookended by two important Vatican councils, the first and the second. The second council occurred only a few years after his death, which was a major undertaking of reform amid a rising tide of secularization to essentially modernize the Catholic Church. So a bit about Teilhard's Christocentrism. Teilhard has an understanding of Christ in relation to the evolutionary nature of the cosmos, which shows that the cosmic Christ is not only the source and sustainer of everything, but also the ultimate end goal and engine of creation as well. His aim was for a new Christianity, one that was a blend of theology and science. According to Teilhard, writing in his journal in 1940, the universe evolves driven and allured by the cosmic heart, the motor of evolution, the sacred heart, the essence of all energy. Teilhard came to recognize the cosmic Christ as both immanent and transcendent. Immersed within the emerging universe, Christ guides the cosmos as it ascends from one critical point to another on its path toward integration and unification. For him, the omega point was the final and greatest evolutionary point, where the material and human were finally reunited with the divine. Christ is essentially the motor for realizing the omega point. Teilhard's theological views were totally Christocentric in nature. Christ, says Teilhard, writing in the extant publication of his essay, Cosmic Life, is the term of even the natural evolution of living beings. Evolution is holy. Also, evolution by revealing a summit to the world makes Christ possible, just as Christ, by giving sense, meaning, and direction to the world, makes evolution possible. Evolution helps us to understand the cosmos and the cosmic Christ of St. John and St. Paul, also the Church Fathers, without whom there would be no cosmos. According to J.A. Lyons, who wrote on the cosmic Christ of both Origen and Teilhard, as the one who holds everything together, Christ exercises a supremacy over the universe, which is physical, not simply juridical. He is the unifying center of the universe and its goal. The function of holding all things together indicates that Christ is not only man and God, he also possesses a third nature, which is cosmic. The cosmic Christ happens through the incarnation and brings the eternal Christ into the material world. This Christ is the culmination point of humanity and the divine, and is essentially the radial center of the universe. It excludes nothing and no one. And the Indian theologian Paul D. Devanandan argues from Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10, that a cosmic Christ united all things to himself. This, he claimed, included non-Christian religions. So we're going to get into some perennialism there. We can understand through Teilhard's theology that he was informed by the universalism of early patristic writers like Origen in certain passages from the New Testament, such as those from Ephesians and Colossians. Also John as well. Overall, Teilhard paints a picture of a universe that is continually evolving with a God that is hard at work to collect and guide. The universe moves upward and toward fulfillment, which is reunion with the divine. So God directs the movement of the universe, of which Christ is the radial center. So as you can see, I've included a couple of illustrations here that show sort of this upward ascent toward the omega point, and this occurs through evolution, and this is essentially Christ drawing all things in to a single point. So from omega point to singularity. Now that an understanding has been established on the critical role Christ plays in the omega point realization, this essay will shift gears to further examine the omega point and singularity. For Teilhard, the omega point is essentially the active logos, which draws all things into himself through an upward ascent and consummation, which is the singularity, when everything that exists, both animate and inanimate, become one with divinity. It's the final culminating point of unification guided by evolution. In describing the motivating forces of the omega point, M. Castillo writes for the American Journal of Neuroradiology, Teilhard's universe was comprised of two fundamental forces, and this is tangential and rotational, which he also calls matter, and radial or centripetal, which is also called love. Centripetal forces lead to involution, that is, transforming a state of disorganized complexity into a more organized one. The end result of this involution is the omega point, or the end of the world as we know it. At this point, the universe finds itself in a state of organized complexity. From the center of the spiraling universe, mankind serves as a conscious observer, or one can also conceive it as each person being the center of his or her own universe, which as time goes by becomes more organized. So you can argue that this is teleological as well. With the aid of technology, huge technological leaps and bounds made from the beginning of Teilhard's life up until now and continue, which continues to compound upon itself in speed and ferocity, humanity draws ever closer to the realization of the omega point, which is the final step before singularity. When considering the aforementioned speed and ferocity of technological growth in our own lifetime, the singularity hypothesis begins to feel closer and closer to reality. Singularity refers to the surpassing of a critical point which unleashes an uncontrollable explosion of technological intelligence, which results in a superintelligence which dominates the human capacity and ends the human era as we know it. Oh my gosh. This could, of course, result in total human extinction or total human integration via nanotechnology, gene splicing, bodily technological enhancements, cloud memory, or consciousness uploading, even a merging of humanity with AI. Teilhard would have likely considered these technological advances as possibility. However, it is important to point out that his omega point is both scientific yet non-technological, perhaps more metaphysical than considering a potential merging with artificial intelligence. And so I thought this quote was really interesting. Don DeLillo writes as such in his work of war fiction called Point Omega. We're a crowd, a swarm. We think in groups, travel in armies. Armies carry the gene for self-destruction. One bomb is never enough, the blur of technology. This is where the oracles plot their wars, because now comes the introversion. Father Teilhard knew this, the omega point, a leap out of our biology. Ask yourself this question: do we have to be humans forever? This quote leads specifically, the final query, the final piece of it, to the question of transhumanism in the face of technological singularity. When one imagines transhumanism, the closest analogies would be almost the bionic man, or the replicants of Blade Runner, which features bioengineered synthetic humans gone rogue, which are hunted down and decommissioned. One further step are the endlessly disposable android hosts that gain sentience and autonomy from their dismal cycle of death and repurposing in Westworld. With this plot on the neurological map, one can begin to imagine how transhumanism would affect our very real bodies. Things like Neuralink, Google Glass, Walletmore payment chips, even medical RFIDs, all of these corporate technological advances bring humanity ever closer to a merge with technology. According to Castillo once more, transhumanism comprises two fundamental changes: the incorporation of technology directly into the brain and or body to improve our functions and performance, and or genetic manipulations to improve biologic processes. In order for singularity to be achieved, the superintelligence must be united to the superbody. While considering the limits of the human body and the limitless and uncharted territory of the mind, it becomes easier to conceive that intelligent singularity may precede corporeal singularity. However, once a threshold is reached, the technological explosion will occur, hypothetically creating eternally updating, eternally perfecting human machines. So the ethical slippery slope of transhumanism. Transhumanism raises very deep moral and ethical questions, and political scientist Francis Fukuyama has declared it the world's most dangerous idea and defines it as the nascent liberatory movement to free humanity from its biological constraints. Transhumanism chooses to refute our very real humanly constraints. Instead of relying upon the chaos of evolution, we use biotechnology to ensure our destiny via biotechnological and biomedical achievements and improvements. The slippery slope is one where an isolated act may appear as totally benign, yet sets off a chain reaction of increasingly harmful effects. And in the case of transhumanism, it relates to more and more extreme enhancements. So just a quote from Fukuyama. According to Fukuyama, writing for Foreign Policy, underlying this idea of the equality of human rights is the belief that we all possess a human essence that dwarfs manifest differences in skin color, beauty, and even intelligence. This essence, and the view that individuals therefore have inherent value, is at the heart of political liberalism. But modifying that essence is the core of the transhumanist project. If we start transforming ourselves into something superior, what rights will these enhanced creatures claim? And what rights will they possess when compared to those left behind? If some move ahead, can any afford not to follow? These questions are troubling enough within rich, developed societies. Add in the implications for citizens of the world's poorest countries, for whom biotechnology's marvels will likely be out of reach, and the threat to the idea of equality becomes even more menacing. For Fukuyama, we are marvelously complex due to the evolutionary process, and any tinkering with human characteristics leads humanity into uncharted territory. Authors M.J. McNamee and S.D. Edwards bring this uncharted terrain to light in an article entitled Transhumanism, Medical Technology and Slippery Slopes, in which they imagine a future where individuals are divided between human and post-human, highlighted sharply between the rich and the poor, those who are not able to keep up with the newly heightened transhumanism. It is also possible that at some point the human and post-human will become incompatible for reproduction, and so two separate classes of humans will begin to go down an impossible to return from evolutionary step. This brings a larger question. If there is no longer a shared human commonality, how can we navigate the ethics and morality of things like human rights? In a stratified society, singularity and its consort, transhumanism, will be controlled by those with the most means and power, which will likely create a more acute overclass and underclass, where power and control are leveraged in new ways beyond our comprehension. In addition to this very real possibility that is blooming as this is written, singularity and transhumanism beg very large ethical questions. Are we playing God? Transhumanism raises the question as to whether or not it is a threat to morality itself. According to McNamee and Edwards, writing of the German critical theorist Jürgen Habermas, one further objection voiced by Habermas is that interfering with the process of human conception, and by implication human constitution, deprives humans of the naturalness which so far has been a part of the taken for granted background of our self-understanding as a species. And getting used to having human life biotechnologically at the disposal of our contingent preferences cannot help but change our normative self-understanding. This also raises the question as to what nature is. Is it eternally malleable and meant to be dominated? Is the world solely for our appropriation, as is discussed in Dialectic of Enlightenment? For Adorno and Horkheimer, the celebration of reason, and in it the domination of nature, has led to oppressive governance. Similarly, there is the question of regress against progress when it comes to transhumanism. Adorno and Horkheimer write as such in the preface. The enslavement to nature of people today cannot be separated from social progress. The increase in economic productivity, which creates the conditions for a more just world, also affords the technological apparatus and the social groups controlling it a disproportionate advantage over the rest of the population. In reality, the question of transhumanism is a deeply economic and capitalist question as well. Biotechnology and posthumanism represent life as a commodity. As I have stressed, biotechnology affords us the very real future possibility of a biohacked overclass and a vulnerable, impoverished underclass. While Teilhard and many others have asserted that human beings are co-creators alongside God, and biblically there is much support for this, technology makes attainable the ability to go beyond human means. Can human beings be reduced to data, updated based on sentient algorithms? Can we ever truly transcend our innately embodied existence? In our lifetime, transhumanism may become our very own Tower of Babel, a vain attempt to strike out for ourselves away from Imago Dei, our final attempt to kill God via securing mortality that is locked into algorithms and computer codes. The question of technological singularity and transhumanism are deeply entangled with capitalism. This is made implicitly clear in the desire to overcome the limits of the human body, the prioritization of artifice, and the all too real potential for an overclass and underclass, even human and post-human. Individuals with the means to alter their bodies to such an extent that evolution takes humanity down two very separate evolutionary paths. These decisions are permanent and completely alter how we relate to society, the economy, our own bodies, and the bodies of others around us. Additionally, it raises the question of what role corporations who apply these new artificial improvements will play in our lives as they become more and more deeply entangled within the human body. For certain, this is not the future Teilhard envisioned with his honest understanding of Christocentric consummation, but it is his theory's logical conclusion and has been used to justify both our melding with technology and biohacking of the human body. However, his theory has been corrupted, as God is not the machine, and singularity only represents the human-made idol destroying the human. For Teilhard, Christ will collect us into him, in totality, as he represents the motor of all evolution. Humanity is not responsible for driving this evolution, and we represent but one small part of this universal plan. We are not the focal center, but Christ is. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was kind of fun and interesting to research and write about. Anyways, if you have questions about Teilhard or Singularity, anything like that, just leave a comment. Thanks so much. I hope you have a great day.